They say a story is only as good as its villain, and that's especially true for the Far Cry series. But let's face it, these games aren't known for their Oscar-worthy writing, or even good writing sometimes. That being said, they usually nail the villain. I mean, hell, they stopped putting the good guys on the cover back in like 2008. Who cares about some mute gun-toting man-handed loser? Just slap one of these dorks on the cover. One of the most exciting parts of a new Far Cry game is a new antagonist. It's become like the main marketing gimmick at this point. This is why today, we're going to rank every single Far Cry villain ever. We're only going to be looking at the main antagonists, so no side villains. Also, spoilers for every game coming up. At dead last, we have Dr. Kreiger from the original Far Cry. Now, Far Cry 1, it's kinda dumb. I understand it was really important when it came out and all that, but there's a lot of stupid shit in this game. One of these stupid things is a villain. Kreiger is the renowned scientist and creator behind the Trigens, the deadly mutated enemies of the game. As a villain, he just comes off as very boring and generic. Just imagine your stereotypical evil scientist and you pretty much got Kreiger. He doesn't really interact with the player in any significant way either. To be fair, the original Far Cry is a very different game compared to what we would get later. Kreiger may have worked for this game, but he just doesn't hold a candle to literally every other villain in the series. I literally can't think of anything else to say about him, though here's an out of context Far Cry clip.
Just keep your eyes on the jungle, Jack.
Now that we've got some time to chat.
At number 8, we have Mickey and Lou. Now, Far Cry New Dawn is my least favorite Far Cry game, and a lot of that comes down to these two. The twins, as well as the Highwaymen in general, commit the #1 gaming cardinal sin, being cringe. Now, I do think they play off of each other pretty decently. Mickey's a more intelligent and calculated one, while Lou is more impulsive and unpredictable. The game tries to flesh them out and give them backstories, but they don't really commit to this. This just feels like more of a missed opportunity more than anything. Really, the Highwaymen as a whole are pretty generic. It's as if they looked at past villains in the series and tried to recreate them while not knowing what made them special. Their motivation throughout the game is just to get more power, so not exactly that deep. The game is so short, there's just not really a defining moment for these two. The twins had a lot of potential, but they really missed the mark on this one. At number 7, we have the duo Ullin Batari from Far Cry Primal. These characters are definitely an improvement compared to Kreiger and the twins, but they still have their issues. I actually think individually, these two work very well. Batari is the brains, Ull is the brawn. Ull especially is very intimidating. The main drawbacks to these villains is the lack of screen time and focus. Now, I don't think a villain has to have a lot of screen time to be good. In fact, we'll find that more true the further down the list we go. The main issue is that we don't get a focus on them throughout the game. If they had narrowed down to one villain, that could have helped, but the issue would have still been present. At the end of the day, I think this choice was intentional. I always got the impression that Primal was designed to have less of a focus on the villain, at least compared to the other games. I mean, just look at the cover. No villain, villain. No villain, villain. Are you seeing the pattern here? At number 6, I have Anton from Far Cry 6, and this might be the most disappointing villain on the list. I'm a huge Giancarlo Esposito fan, and I was really excited to see how Anton would turn out to be, but sadly he missed the mark for me. Don't get me wrong, the performance is great. It's more so what he has to do throughout the game. Like most of the previous villains, he's hardly in the game. He only interacts with us a handful of times, and none of these encounters are all that special. He just comes off as your stereotypical evil dictator, which is an archetype we got from an earlier game that was pulled off much better. Now, I see what they were trying to do with Anton, and it could have worked. His backstory, or at least what we got of it, was actually pretty deep and interesting. His relationship with his son Diego also had a lot of potential. They could have done so much with it, but it feels like they really did nothing. I don't think Anton is a bad villain necessarily, but he could have been one of the best in the franchise. Instead though, he's one of the most forgettable. Alright, so do you remember how earlier I said, we're only going to be looking at the main antagonists, so no side villains? Yeah, well, that was kind of a lie, because I have Hoyt at number 5. I know he's technically not the side villain in his game, but come on. Now, Hoyt on his own, actually a pretty decent villain. He has a lot of charisma, but he's also very intimidating when he needs to be. He's a perfect blend of sadistic and entertaining, the ideal mix for a Far Cry villain. All in all, their performance here was very well done. The main issue I have with Hoyt is his arrival to the story. Hoyt doesn't show up until over halfway through the game. By then, we've already had a much more interesting and intimidating villain we've been going up against. Only for him to be killed off and told, actually, there's another bad guy, down here. Just, go kill him. He's the real bad guy. Like, he's f***ed up. If we had been introduced to him earlier, if he showed up more during the first half, this could have worked much better. At the end of the day, Hoyt wasn't a bad villain, far from it actually. I just feel like he was underutilized. Okay, it was really hard to narrow down the top 4 on this list. These are without a doubt the best villains in the series, and one could make a case for any of these being number 1. However, someone has to be that bad guy and put Joseph Seed at number 4. I know, but hear me out. Seed is a great villain. I want to get that out of the way right now. He's cunning, he's intimidating, he doesn't know how to wipe his nose. Everything a good Far Cry villain needs to be. Seed's motivations are probably the most interesting part of his character. He's not motivated by money, power, or chaos like other villains in the series. Instead, he's driven by his own twisted moral compass. He thinks he's right in the eyes of God, and he's willing to do anything to get his way. For me, the most interesting aspect of Joseph is his faith. And this really brings up interesting questions. At the end of the day, was he right? The main reason he's lower on the list is for the simple fact that the game focuses on his siblings just as much as the man himself. Now Jacob, John, and Faith are great side villains, and I'm glad they're in the game, but that's just more screen time that could have gone to Joseph. If Joseph had shown up more throughout the game, there's no doubt he would be higher up on the list. That being said, he's still one of the best characters in the whole entire series. At number 3, I have the Jackal from Far Cry 2. I've made it no secret that Far Cry 2 is my favorite game in the series, and one of the best aspects of it is the villain. The Jackal isn't your normal Far Cry villain. There are no long mocap monologues explaining his motives, no over-the-top displays of brutality or insanity. We have an uncomfortably realistic and grounded portrayal of an arms dealer. To even call him a villain outright would be incorrect. One of the biggest themes of Far Cry 2 is isolation, and the Jackal perfectly encapsulates this. There is no royal army or pirates or Peggies at his disposal. Instead, he works alone. His backstory isn't told to us up front, but we can learn more about him by finding his interview tapes scattered across the map. It has been confirmed by Ubisoft that the Jackal is Jack Carver, the player character in the original Far Cry. This adds a whole new dimension to the character. It's not very often that the protagonist of a previous game becomes the antagonist of the next game. He's just the perfect blend of intelligent, ruthless, and charismatic. I almost put the Jackal at number 1, but there were 2 characters I just couldn't put behind him. And also all the Zoomers in the comments would crucify me for praising Far Cry 2. At number 2, I have the one and only Pagan Min. Okay, so right off the bat, Troy Baker gives an incredible performance, one of the most underrated in his whole career. He is by far the most likable villain in the series, and that's mainly because he's an angel and he did nothing wrong. At number 1, I have... Okay, fine. Like I said before, Pagan is the most charismatic and likable villain in the whole series. Despite this hospitality, he can be intimidating when he needs to be. His relationship with Ajay is really interesting. This pseudo father-son relationship hasn't been visited since, but I think it makes for a good dynamic. He could have been your stereotypical dictator villain like Anton, but the writers ended up making him much deeper than that. His backstory is really well done. His hatred for the Golden Path, 100% justified. Some of the best villains are the ones who have noble goals, but go about them the wrong way. Even though he's not on screen that much during the game, you're always hearing from him and seeing his effects on the world. And I mean, let's be real. We all know who the true villains of Far Cry 4 are. Hashtag Pagan Min did nothing wrong. If you're familiar with the Far Cry series at all, it's no surprise what our number 1 pick is. Boss Montenegro is not just the best Far Cry villain, he's probably one of the best villains in all of gaming. When most people think of the series as a whole, they most likely think of Voss. His definition of insanity monologue is definitely a top 10 gaming moment for me. But what makes him such a good villain compared to the others on the list? Well, you see, he's not motivated by money, God, or even power. He truly only wants chaos. He's so unpredictable, you never know what he's gonna do when he's on screen. You can never really tell if he's actually as insane as he says he is, or if his actions are more calculated than he lets on. Michael Mando played this role perfectly. In fact, they actually designed the character of Voss around Mando. Even though he's only in a fairly small portion of the game, he completely steals every scene he's in. His dynamic with Jason is legendary. To this day, we've yet to get a hero-villain relationship like this in Far Cry. If you're interested in more of the Jason-Voss dynamic, I highly suggest watching Far Cry 3 The Symmetry Theory by Ryan Hollinger. It's not only his unpredictability, but his backstory too. His relationship with his sister Citra is very interesting, and it gets fleshed out more in the Insanity DLC. I haven't mentioned the Far Cry 6 Villain DLC up until this point just because I only wanted to factor in the base game, but I would still highly suggest giving them a try. The elephant in the room is, spoiler alert, him dying. Boss is killed halfway through the game, and then we have to go over to Hoyt. Now, as much as I enjoy Hoyt as a villain, he just doesn't hold a candle to Voss at all. Him getting killed off so early is a huge disappointment. Despite this, he's still the best villain in the whole series. Who knows what we would have got if he was a main villain throughout the whole entire game. Say what you will about the Far Cry series, but you can't deny that the villains are great. Most of them, at least. Do you agree with my list? Let me know down below in the comments. As always, this is just my opinion, so don't take it too seriously. Except you Far Cry New Dawn fans, I meant everything I said. If you liked the video, liking and subscribing really helps me out. It's honestly the best way to support the channel. I think that's all for me. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.